Afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us. If you could say a little hello in the chat and let us know where you're located at, getting to bring everybody a little bit closer together. My name is Adrienne Lipscomb. I want to thank you so much for joining us for Slow Food USA Lunch and Learn. I know we had a little time off. There were some exciting things that happened. Terra Madre in Sacramento just wrapped up and we are getting ready to move to the holiday season. So, one of the first things I want to let y'all know, if you are not involved, you really should get involved, is Monday, October 28th is our national roundtable in our roundtable network. And that session will have a report out on the leadership survey and highlight trends and voices from the chapter. So it's a good chance to get to know a couple of your chapter members or other from other areas. Also, the charitable giving season and membership is coming out, so make sure you keep an eye out on your emails and on social media. And December 10th is Terra Madre Day. It is our global day of action and celebration for local food and communities. So I believe Robin will drop a link for that information. And as always, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoy being able to do these lunch and learn and getting to know a little bit more about different experts that are within our slow food. Today I am so super excited because it is a really, really good friend of mine, Chef Blue Adams. How are you doing, Blue?
I'm doing so good. Thank you for inviting me.
So I would like to start was like, I've known Blue for a couple years now. First it was more word of mouth. I think we knew each other more word of mouth, and then we had the opportunity to come together during a James Beard boot camp, which focused on advocacy in food. And at that time, we were really focused on a very serious topic right now, which is SNAP. And as you know, of what's happening politically, SNAP has been kind of on the chopping block at this moment. But I would like to start kind of at the beginning of your journey of what connected you to food and community, and tell a little people, tell people a little bit about yourself.
Oh, where to
I know
start?
that's loaded. It was really loaded.
I'm long-winded, so if you need to give me cues to wind it down, please do. Um, so my name is Blue Adams. I am Mandan Hidatsa and Dene. I'm from the communities of Denevicare for the Navajo Nation and Fort Berthold, Mandaree, North Dakota, the MHA Nation. I grew up in both of those communities, but my belly button is buried in Provo, Utah, where I'm currently at and where I co-own and operate the Continental. So, growing up on my communities, what my experience was, and again, this is just my experience, there wasn't a lot to do. Um, if you know anything about how reservations operate. They are held mostly under federal trust. And so it's very difficult to develop businesses, much less housing, infrastructure, et cetera. So at a very young age, I was blessed to be a part of a family of entrepreneurs. Specifically, my parents. My father was a gold and silversmith, very renowned, Winston Mason. Um, My mother was a ceramicist, painter, just kind of good at anything, any art she picked up. And my siblings were also very entrepreneurial. My brothers ran our family businesses, which was a theater and a flower shop and catering. So that was my entry into entrepreneurship. But my brother Mark was a chef, and from a very young age, we just have been in love with food, hospitality, feeding people. So, as far back as I can remember, I've been selling food, whether it was breakfast burritos and a little blue cooler, which anybody growing up on a reservation can recognize the spam and potato burritos in the little blue cooler, all the way up to in our teens, we would cater local dances at the schools or the chapter houses or the government buildings. And at one point, we were serving sushi on the Navajo reservation at the theater, and people were just, what are you doing? But after I started our first brick and mortar in Provo, Utah, when I moved back to Provo to pursue a business degree, and my business plan, my graduating project was a business plan for a restaurant, and that became Black Sheep Cafe. And operating the cafe gave me insight to food procurement, and we were focused on sustainability and purchasing local and supporting our communities, and understanding where our food was coming from was just inherent because of our culture and our upbringing. But over the years, it's become increasingly more difficult. And what I recognized is our own communities don't have access to very nutritious foods. An example is Tenaypakia is the size of West Virginia. We have a fluctuating population between 300 and 400,000, yet we only have 12 grocery stores. So recognizing how food systems work, how distribution, procurement, everything in the food system, I started to want to learn how to support farmers in our own communities. So after a few years operating Black Sheep, I made the decision to sell it, and I started Indigihub, which is my current nonprofit. And the nonprofit works to support farmers, food producers, chefs as a means to jumpstart an economy. The Navajo Nation is one of the only demographics that have what we call 24-hour leakage, which means they get paid on a Friday and it leaks to the border towns by Sunday, Monday. So Indigihub is looking at ways to capture that revenue, and what makes sense is the quickest way to do so is through supporting local food production and local food systems. So one of the statistics for that I've pulled from Local First Utah, who I've worked with for a very, very long time. And their data shows that if you're purchasing from a local restaurant, a local mom and pop restaurant, you're reinvesting up to 80% of your revenue back into the community, and it circulates for longer, versus 30% if it's like a Denny's or a Pizza Hut corporate food. So it makes sense that the quickest and most reliable way to capture those dollars is through food.
Yeah. Like I said, we've known each other for a long time. And I know we've talked about how government or politics play, especially on the reservation, and as carried as a nonprofit. Can you talk about the difficulties on receiving grants and from our federal government? For I know you're smiling, but like I want people to understand like how vast this is and how difficult it is to receive aid.
Absolutely. So when you think about all grant monies or philanthropic dollars, there's a website, and I can't think of it on the top of my head. If I can find it, or somebody can find it, they can put it in the chat. But it estimates that of all that money available to nonprofits or mutual aid groups, which many of the Indigenous communities rely on mutual aid because it's so difficult to navigate the government grant process. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But it's somewhere around 4% of all dollars available to Indigenous programming, and then that lessens when it's directed towards food. And you just mentioned SNAP, because the Farm Bill Many of the programs, conservation, regenerative agriculture, those programs come under the Farm Bill. Those are some of the first things that were cut. So as hard as it was before January to get funding, it's become even more difficult. And much of the community relies on SNAP because of the economic disparities. So not having access to SNAP and with the government shutdown, it's becoming more and more difficult to access nutritious food. So one of because of the complexity of our relationship with the federal government and almost 90% of Navajo being held under federal trust, it's very difficult process to build buildings from scratch. And there's not a lot of buildings available to do business, much less production or manufacturing. So what that means is many of our residences and even businesses don't have a physical address. And if you're applying for a grant through the USDA or through the government, it's required that you have a physical address. Not only is it required for grant and funding, it's required for business licensing, wholesale licensing, a UPS package, an Amazon package. So that I think that's something that not a lot of people are aware of that is so restrictive to moving us forward and developing an entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yeah. I don't even tell you this enough, but you're one of my sheroes because I'm going to bring up like a sensitive topic about during, I know, right? And we're very prone to crying, so hopefully nobody will cry. During COVID, right? Your organization did something that even federal government was not doing. I know, I'm sorry about this side, but people need to know.
I think there's been enough time. We'll see. Maybe there's been enough time between to get a little more hardened, but we'll see. So at the end of 2019, we had built we're really focused on co-working as a model for if we can possess infrastructure and we have access to internet and things like this, what model can we do that benefits the community? And it was shared spaces. So the first pilot co-working hub for IndigiHub was at the capital of the Navajo Nation, which is Window Rock, Arizona. There's a small business complex there. We rented one of the small buildings and we just built a beautiful space, which was kind of like a business center / community center. Because, and again, unless you've had the experience of living there and trying to do business there, even with the tribal government, it's extremely difficult. Because the Navajo Nation is so large, if you're coming from Western border, the capital where all the tribal government offices are and where you do most of your business is about 3 hours away. So you drive to the capital and you fill out a business form or you're trying to get a permit for housing and they tell you, oh, this is wrong. You need to go redo it. There's no stopgap between that. There's no services where like, oh, I'll just go to the nearest Kinko's. Those don't exist. So building the co-work hub with the business hub, we gave the community access to the internet, to a Wi-Fi printer, to basic business, like I'm talking paper clips, pens, and then mentorship about how to fill out the forms correctly and access to other people that have gone through these processes. But one of my thoughts was, how can we go farther? So we decided to build a coffee shop in it. And we started Skoden Coffee and we sold it at cost to a community member so they would have an opportunity to run a business that was fully set up with systems, recipes, etc. And that relationship was really beautiful. It got to the point where some tribal employees who had to travel to Windrock from Western Border, where previously they had to park at the McDonald's to access Wi-Fi. Now they had a beautiful space where they could sit comfortably, and they had, it was like a little office. So that's something that we had intended on running, and I think I got a little bit off track here because I was trying to talk about Blackbird.
Yeah.
Apologize. So our first iteration was Blackbird, the shared kitchen space. So, but it was modeled after co-working. So if we know that food businesses, and there are so many micro food businesses across the reservation, across different Indigenous communities, it just made sense. How can we provide them with infrastructure, a safer space to do business? So we built Blackbird, partnered with Day Customs in Window Rock, who was generous enough because he had a building, to give us a portion of it, remodeled, plumbed, everything. It was a beautiful little cafe that at its height shared space with 8 other concepts. And it was so inspiring to see them just take off with their little food businesses, and the community just embraced us. And it was amazing to see people travel as far from Phoenix and Santa Fe, which are about 6 hours away, to visit Blackbird because they had never seen anything like that on the reservation. Unfortunately, at the end of 2019, when COVID hit, everything just shut down, including Blackbird. Navajo had one of the strictest masking protocols in the nation. And we knew immediately that we were in trouble, because what they were telling us is social distancing, washing hands, etc. We have relatives in our communities that need to travel upwards of an hour to even access water. So my first thought was shut down our restaurants. Blackbird was the first one we shut down. We were in the middle of building House of Fry Bread in Provo. We shut that one down, and I just started taking donations. I didn't know what else to do. I just started taking donations, driving them 7 hours to the Navajo Nation. I was lucky enough to get plugged into a network of amazing humans all over the world who were just getting us supplies, because many of our communities, including the Navajo Nation, when we asked the federal government for help, they sent us body bags. That was our first delivery. And it was devastating to know that if there's a supply chain, we know the supply chain's breaking. We're not even a link in that chain. We're just kind of a silo. So we connected with makers that were printing 3D masks. They were, and I'm talking not just our community members, our federally funded healthcare facilities didn't have access to gloves, face shields, surgical gowns. I mean, anything we could get our hand on, anything people could 3D print or maker spaces were making for us, we were collecting. And because I had established Blackbird on Google with a QR or the code, the location plus code, I was able to get shipments. That was one of the first thing I did. And that was one thing I wanted to hack is, I don't have a physical address. How can I get shipping? Oh, Google allows for this plus code, and FedEx, UPS, freight, they all accept it. So that's one of the first thing I did. And because I did that, we were able to receive hundreds of thousands of pieces of PPE that came through our facilities. Both points, House of Fry Bread was stacked floor to ceiling, and so was Blackbird Brunch with PPE, hand sanitizer, masks, gloves. It got to the point where we were providing hospital beds and oxygen tanks to the chairman at Tohono O'odham Nation. The Tohono O'odham Nation crosses the border into Mexico. So they were forgotten by 2 governments. by the time we reached some of their community members, they were harvesting rabbits because they just didn't have access to food. So that is one of the stories that I love so much. Jose Verlin, who was the former chair, and he may have been reelected. I need to check up on that. But what an amazing human. And it just grew. I think I drove more than 5,000 miles over the 2 years, hand delivering. And, our first responders, when the police, Window Rock Police and Crown Point Police reached out to us, they were saying that they were getting spit on by some of these people they were trying to arrest. So that was our first shipment of shields. Many times we were the first point of contact for ambulance drivers, policemen, firemen, even our surgeons and our doctors, which was just, it was mind boggling to me that this little organization was the only one picking up that slack.
Yeah, and I thank you for telling us that story because it's a hard one and I always get emotional when I hear it every time. But I want people to really understand the severity of when something happens, not just to us in the United States. And you brought up a very good point. And I talk about it all the time. Like the last people to receive aid has been more the indigenous community of the United States, that are always the last one or forgotten or they receive the least or not even thought of. And that has been, something that really relies on my mind. And so I want to bring it back up into the food scene, right? Um, when we talk about seeds and we talk about slow food, the indigenous community is the first one I think about when we talk about slow food, right? Can you tell me a little bit about what slow food means to you, and how it plays? Because now you have a restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want people to know where your restaurant is and what you're doing. Can you, but first tell me, what does slow food really mean to you or mean to your community?
Slow food, and that's a relatively new term for me because it's just food.
Yeah.
It's food and it's in its most natural state, the way it's planted, cared for, harvested, distributed, prepared, ingested. It's a circle, right? It's literally the circle of life. Um, and specifically for our communities, we have such a heavy reliance on the fast food, which doesn't have as much care. You literally don't know what is going into it, where it's coming from, when it was picked. So slow food is very more the intention and care of food. When we talk about food systems, we're talking about the soil, we're talking about the seed, we're talking about the hands that are nurturing the seed to plant, and then those that are harvesting. We're talking about the cold chain, the aggregation, the distribution, the sale, the purchase. All of those things need to be repaired. Our current food system is literally breaking, if not broken already.
Oh, it's broken. We know it's broken.
So how do we become more intentional about where we're sourcing from, what we're feeding our customers? So with the Continental, that was one of the things that I was really passionate about. I'm lucky to have partners and investors that are like-minded and that give me the ability to do the things we do, because not all of them can be cost productive,
Right.
unfortunately. But you can become profitable if you get support from the community. And so that's something that we've been really working on. Our philosophy is, that holistic model. What are we preparing? Where is the waste going? What are the animals that we're using? We have trout brought in live, so our chefs have the experience of harvesting a live animal to rebuild that relationship with where our food is coming from and to build that respect. We encourage them to use the whole animal, the whole plant. So, we try to use everything that we access. Any excess vegetable goes into stock. We're trying to partner with an organization to build a composting model for us and other restaurants downtown. But when we understand that the soil microbiome mimics your gut microbiome, we begin to understand that our human health starts in the soil. So we only work with producers that grow in soil. Even our microgreens are grown in soil. The only exception we have are the aquaponics, only because they do kind of a hybrid. Their plants are in soil, but they're fertilized by what the fish are producing, and they also sell the fish too. So it's a closed loop system. It's tough. I mean, if we want to keep bison on our menu, I have to drive 5 hours to the Ute tribe and purchase in huge quantities. But by doing that, they can reinvest that money into their program.
Right.
And for the Ute tribe, that's life. That was their way of life. They're trying to reestablish their herd, and they offer first to their community, and then the rest that is available for the community to purchase or restaurants to purchase. I'm not going to say it's easy, it's hard, but when you have a whole team that buys into what you're doing, it makes it easier. And when you have customers that appreciate that, that ethos, then it becomes easier.
Yeah. So, I want to talk about current times and and kind of like our food scene now, right? We have a huge concern about our food policy, and what is on the chopping block right now. The farm bill has kind of disappeared. I kind of feel, hasn't been really talked about. We haven't really talked about the severity of our farmers, which is kind of big news right now because of the tariffs and the lack of funding for farmers. But this is, when I say for farmers, a majority of our farmers in the United States are white, they're male, they're 65 and up, or 55 and up, excuse me. But it dwindles down to BIPOC farmers and not receiving of funding as much as well. What are you seeing in the indigenous communities of farmers? Are you seeing people going hyper local or trying to work closer to their local network? Or is it still the same thing of what they've been dealing with in over time or the last 5 years?
I think for a lot of the farmers and organizations I work with, it's always been hyper local. There isn't a lot of access for indigenous farmers into global market. So the money, of course, through the USDA programs have dried up, but there's been an interesting turn of more private philanthropy dollars going towards our projects. And that's been really good to see. So we've always kind of relied on self-sufficiency. So for our communities, not much has changed. And I've been saying this for so long, like this is how we've existed for so long, but others are starting to get a taste of it. And that has opened up perspectives and paradigms to understanding the indigenous experience, especially if you're in traditional lands or you're on a reservation. And it's unfortunate that it took this, but we're beginning to understand that we are all connected. We do this together or not at all. We need to come together. And so there's no more space for othering. We're all human beings. We all need food, water, shelter. That is the basis of economy. We've been forced into this extractive economy of consumerism. which at the end of the day, it doesn't matter as much as feeding our communities and having access to clean water. That is human health. So we've always lived in that space. And I am very honored to partner and work with the farmers I do. The majority are female, very young, but they do share space for the elders because those are our knowledge holders.
Right.
Knowledge is collaborative. No one owns knowledge. So because of that ethos and because of the organizations I work with, we created IndigiHub to be an umbrella of protection. All we want to do is give you money, give you funding, give you training, give you access to, soil testing, provide you with microscopes so you can actively watch the microbiome in your soil grow. Contamination testing is very expensive. Let's give you dollars to do that. Make sure where you're growing is safe.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because we've had serious conversation about that. But we talked about soil, but I want you to talk about this testing and what y'all been working on. I think this is amazing and that people really should know about this.
So depending on who you ask, what sites you source, anywhere from 300 to almost 1,000 open uranium pits still exist and require reclamation. So, and there's not a lot of data around this, but we know that at least 70% of homes and soil is or may be contaminated. That's a huge health issue. What we provide for the farmers, we partner with Crescent Soil out of Ogden, Utah. They travel to the farm, they do they take samples, they provide microscopes for the farmers, they give them instruction on how to reclaim their soil and heal. So the one project we're super focused on are the bio boxes. The bio box is it's like a bioreactor. It generates or it builds 100% biologically complete compost that they can inoculate into their floodwater so they can build their soil. And one of the farms we work with, she's been doing this for 4 years now. And you can see the stark difference between literally this side of her fence is all sand and this side is just beautiful black soil. But it's necessary because there's little to no testing going on, and you have these farmers trying to work in their soil, but we don't know if it's safe. And it's becoming more desperate because Utah, where the White Mountain, is it White Mountain Navajo? There's a few communities out there in Blanding, Utah. They have the last operating uranium mill. And so because uranium is becoming popular again for nuclear power, I think the last shipment from Japan came in 2023 or 24 of spent nuclear rods where they claim that they can squeeze out just a few more, drops of uranium at this processing mill. But it has to travel from somewhere, and many states don't want it to travel through their states. So what's left are these communities that they don't have a lot of oversight, or they're, especially for Navajo, trucking all the way across we have 22 communities in Arizona, 22 communities in New Mexico. They're trucking these dangerous, whatever you call them. And there's no safeguards for if they spill, if it crash, etc.
Yeah.
What I want to nail the point home though, for all nuclear waste in the United States, about 80% of it is within 50 miles of an Indigenous community.
Yeah. Yeah. I think more oversight is needed, but also this information needs to be more public, right? Because this is happening on, on land, and it's happening to people. And I really commend you for taking this on. It is a lot of work, and especially as a chef that is owner of a restaurant, of running a restaurant, but also in the nonprofit and working in full policy and advocacy work. This is just something, we both tackle and talk about all the time. And, I always wonder, especially on a leadership role for you as an Indigenous woman, you know, how are you defining, or how do you feel it's being defined now, during our current time, to be a leader in leading this information out there? Are you finding it difficult? Are you finding people are listening to you, or is there still this huge need of a push to have these conversations?
I think more and more they're listening. And I think it is because of that paradigm shift, right? Because we're beginning to recognize that everything tastes the same. And
Yeah,
it's because Cisco bought more than 9 major distribution companies. And so what you're eating in Utah, you're also eating in DC or Seattle or California. Specific to Utah, we export most almost 100% of our food. We import 98% of our vegetable, 96% of our fruit.
yeah.
So part of my advocacy and my mission and my, you know, rage is having grown up in a food basket and watching it deplete to a food desert. We've
Mhm.
lost over 100,000 acres of farmland in the last 10 years to development. Where I'm sitting, my home, we have animal and water rights, but they just rezoned the last protected BLM land on the bench of the mountain, and they're putting almost 200 houses there.
Yeah,
So, I understand we need to live, but we also need to eat, and we deserve access to healthy food. And if the only access we have is coming off a truck and it's been sitting in a warehouse for who knows how long,
right,
further your food travels, the more it nutrients deplete. So by
right,
the time it ends up on your plate, there's little to no nutrient value. So if we think about food in the terms of economy, if we had access to healthy food, and I'm talking like in one of the biggest arguments for regenerative farming is, oh, it's expensive. Well, it's really not. And we've proven that by providing this little bio box for less than $6,000 that will produce in perpetuity as long as they maintain it. And it's just when you use regenerative growing processes, you can have 5 to 6 times more yield per crop. When you're thinking about, like, for a lot of our communities, we've been acclimating our seeds for climate resistance and drought because we haven't have access to water. So, being thoughtful about how you're treating your seeds and understanding your environment and the changing environment. A lot of farmers, big production farmers, are not doing that. They're relying on these old methods that no longer serve them. They need to be more thoughtful about it. They'll get higher yields, they'll get higher density, nutrition density foods.
right,
And in the long term, it'll help relieve the burden of healthcare. I know in one of our conferences we went to, they said how much, I think it was like for every $1 we spend on food, we're spending 3 or 4 on healthcare.
right.
So it just makes sense to start growing food locally. Um, Regional production is something that we support. So because we're in the Mountain West, we get some of our wheat from Cortez, Colorado, the Sonoran Desert from the Tohono O'odham Nation, tepary beans, things that have grown here, do grow here, and do benefit. The bison is a good example of that. The bison are a keystone species. They're extremely important for our foodscape and our environment. They're a clean animal. They produce their own antibodies. They're very intelligent. If they do get sick, they seek out plant medicine. They're selective grazers. They don't decimate environments. They're not as water intensive as the cattle that also exist here and destroy wetlands, grasslands, everything in their path. So we just need to be more aware of who we're supporting, the food we're eating, and understanding that food is a human right as well as water, and so is housing.
So I want to know, how can we show more allyship to the Indigenous community?
It's just the being invited into spaces like this. So
Mhm.
thank you for inviting me here. And again, I speak on behalf of myself and my community, not necessarily for them. There's so many differing opinions, and that's okay. We need to come into these conversations hopefully with a more open mind and an understanding that humans have so many vastly different experiences that may affect biases or whatever, but being open to new experiences, new conversations, new viewpoints, that is very, very helpful. So just being invited into spaces, being willing to listen. Um, we come up against so many crazy stereotypes. That's one thing that's hard to get past. And we talked about this before. Sometimes the conversations start, well, 500 years ago, this happened. And then through the 1800s, all of these federal policies were have impacted. And in 2008, Obama just barely lifted the 40-year development ban on Hopi and Navajo, where you couldn't even repair your home. I mean, these are not historical issues. These are current policies, federal policies that negatively impact us. So it's not that we're lazy or we're entitled or we're waiting for a handout. In my community, it can take up to 20 years to get a home site lease or a business site lease to start from new construction, and it's very expensive. My sister's home site lease, if she wanted access to electricity, it was $35,000 to get the pole installed, and then another 20,000 to get connected, plus the purchase of her home, the archaeological evaluation, all of these things, all of these permits that exist that make it very difficult to develop. So yeah, it may be easier to go to Gallup and go to the Walmart, but my sole mission is, how do we circumvent all of these policies? And I found ways, and I will continue to do that.
So we're getting towards, I want to open it up for people if they have any questions to put in the chat, but we do have a question. Someone asked, what are some possible solutions to the challenge of needing a physical address? And that's going back to needing an address just to even to apply for a grant or to apply for federal funding.
One of the things we're working on is I have, and I've been trying to figure out how to do this. I have, my family has a plot of land, and I would love to build a structure there for a larger co-working space. So one of the things we can do is, and what I did at Blackbird was, instead of PO box, we use suite.
Mm.
So our co-working space has a physical address, if we can, or a QR code. But if we put suite 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which are just boxes where people can receive mail or packages, that's one way we can hack. There are organizations and projects where they are trying to establish physical addressing. I can't remember what it's called. It's started on the Utah side of Navajo. And so there's another example of,
Loophole, like finding loopholes, is it?
well, so just the obstruction, because the
Mm.
Navajo encompasses parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And so each state has different ways of doing things, but you're on Navajo. So, it's really complicated and convoluted, but there are programs that are trying to establish physical addressing and some that are working with Google. But it's going to take a very long time. So if we can provide this co-work space, or if, I've been saying for so long, the Navajo Nation has they're what are called chapter houses. There's 112 of them, and they're like the community government center. If those chapter houses could provide what a co-working space provided, that's an immediate benefit for the community.
Mm-hmm.
But they all act kind of like satellites, and they don't really communicate well with each other, and then with Window Rock, which is the main office. And then after you go all through all the processes, you go to your chapter house first, then you go to Window Rock. The last step is the signature from the Department of Interior, the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And that's the hardest to get. So no matter what we do, we have to get it approved by the federal government. So I don't know who's saying we have sovereignty. It's a
There's just
complicated
it's
issue.
all these layers that you have to
So
get
many layers.
to, yeah, to get to, just to have physical change for good for your community. And it
But
takes
yeah, so I guess one of the solution is fund us and we'll build a big co-working hub.
I mean, put it out in the universe, right? Because and we say it all the time. We have to say what we need, or it's not going to come to us. So I want to, people, if you do have a question, this is the best time to just like put it in the chat. And we'll ask the chef, ask Chef Blue. Now the future, right? Like, I am looking at the future smaller, instead of like 5, 10 years. I'm like, what is next year going to look like? Right. Because just politically, we don't even know really what tomorrow will bring. But, what do you see happening in the next 6 months to a year? I'm not going to take it to 10, 5 years, like
Wow.
6. And that's saying a lot, right? Um, because we've already seen things happen when we're talking about immigration. And that was a large conversation, and I know we spoke on it briefly, about the Indigenous community and immigration issues that are coming up, and necessarily what could happen, which is something, it's something that's like abominable. But what do you see happening in the next 6 months to a year, for your community?
I see a lot of restaurants closing.
Yeah.
It's just the inevitability of it. Um, it's really interesting to watch how the current administration is going at the issues we have, because it's not a broad program. It's not a broad. Um, they're not looking at it in a broad spectrum. Like they're saying, okay, here's a problem, no more problem, but there's gaps there.
Right.
You're not going about it in the right way. There's so many gaps that are going to affect everybody's livelihood and are immediately affecting us. I can count on, I'm already need two hands to count how many people I know that are selling their restaurant or closing their restaurant right now.
Yeah.
And that's a big economic engine for our communities, especially if they're local. Like I said, they're investing up to 80%. It's the revenue because of that ethos, buy local, is circulating longer. We're losing those. And as soon as one closes, a corporate restaurant shows up. So
Yeah.
that's when I think I see in the immediate future.
Yeah.
I think too, like confidence in our in the people in our community that are supposed to protect us and keep us safe, that is starting to wane.
Mm.
fear of our neighbors is starting to increase. None of this is good. Like I said, we work together, we come together, or we're not going to survive. There's so much, but I don't want to get
I don't want to cry. So yeah, let's not cry because we are very known to crying. I have another question, and there's chefs like you, Crystal Ipa, Sean Sherman out there, and someone asked, can you speak on where you see the future of Indigenous cooking food, both in a culinary and a cultural standpoint?
the future. This is always an interesting topic for me because we've been here.
Yeah,
So the concept I branded it as is Native Americana. And Native Americana for me is American cuisine through an Indigenous lens. Because when I ask people what is Indigenous food, I get corn, beans, squash, and fry bread.
right.
No recognition that American food is Native American food, that the Americas have contributed 70% of agriculture worldwide. Many cuisines wouldn't exist without the contribution of the Americas. So the future of Indigenous food is the past, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and it's been here. And I think,
In here.
having chefs like I said, you, Crystal, Sean, and many other Indigenous chefs that are now shining a light on that this food has been here, but also giving an avenue for letting others taste it and like
Absolutely.
realizing, the breadth of America's, the food is a lot bigger
A hundred
than
percent.
a lot bigger than hot dogs and hamburgers and pizza.
Yep.
Has been eye-opening, and rooted in agriculture, it's rooted in history, it's rooted in storytelling, and that these stories are older to me than time, like they've been here, I think is so significant. And that y'all are standing on shoulders of greatness and being the voice to telling the story. And I hope people will seek out these restaurants. They're showing up, they're getting support, you're getting support, and I want people to try this food and realize that they'll recognize these flavors. They'll-
Absolutely.
yeah,
And that's been the my favorite part of the Continental is the storytelling. Literally, we're telling food stories and we're inviting chefs from all over the country, all the way through Mexico, South America, to come up and tell their food story. And through that, not finding, but reconnecting and understanding how long we've been connected. One of my favorite stories is Chef Luis. He's an Oaxacan chef. He's in Asheville, North Carolina right now.
yeah, I know, Luis.
I love Luis. The similarities between a dish he made with the Oaxacan blue corn and Navajo blue corn that we make. It was like eating what I used to eat in my grandma's hogan. It was remarkable how similar. Just reigniting those relationships with food, understanding how long we've been in trade, like forever, way before colonization, and recognizing like my partnership with Chef Eric C, who buys hundreds of pounds of green chili from Hatch, New Mexico, and drives it to Brooklyn. That used to be a trade route. Most of the highways in the United States were trade routes. So, telling these stories and reminding ourselves how long we've shared space as human beings, it also helps against that narrative of the other. Oh, they're a different color, race, orientation, whatever. I must be afraid of them. That isn't true. We have cohabitated for so long. we require those trade routes, those networks. Not No one human can, you know, generate everything that they need to survive.
Yeah.
No one community can do that either. We depend on other communities growing foods in regions where they're appropriate, where they can thrive, and where they can be the most nutrient dense, and then trading amongst each other.
Yeah. So, I like to end this to talk about the youth, the future, and the Indigenous youth, right? Because we've had a lot of sad conversation, but what would you like to tell them? What would you like for them to know?
I would like to listen to them.
Mm.
And the reason I say that is we have a saying in our communities about the seventh generation and about the rainbow tribe and about the children that will be born of the soil. So one of my philosophies is, you know, a lot of people that have migrated here, they've lost their connection to the soil, where the indigenous people have lived and died here for millennia. We have a very intimate relationship with the soil, the plants, the water, the animals, the universe. And we've been waiting for people to reconnect. And so that's coming
Mm. Mm.
in the
We
children.
we got one more question. And I can answer it, but I want you to answer it. They're wondering, do you ever incorporate cuisines in Indigenous cooking, particularly wondering whether you ever experimented with Asian Indigenous fusion?
Absolutely. I'm doing a bean paste with the Anasazi beans that are grown in southern Utah, Colorado, to mimic some Asian flavors so I can work with Chef Jordan and his sushi concept.
Yeah.
I also have I just fermented a prickly pear, and I'm bringing it to vinegar so we can mix that in with the sushi rice.
Yeah. It's going to be fun. So hopefully I will be able to get Jordan, who is also known as Mr. Tuna, to come talk about sustainability and seafood. So look forward to that one. He's out of Portland, Maine. Um, but yeah, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And I want to congratulate us for not crying because that is something big for us to
We got
do.
close a couple of
Usually every
times.
time we have a conversation. But please tell people where they can find you and how they can contact you if you want to be contacted.
Um, so we are at indigihub.org, INDIGEHUB, Indigihub on Instagram, Facebook, and I think it's called X now. I don't go there very often. And the Continental Provo.com.
Please, guys, go enjoy this food, learn more, ask questions, seek local, work within our community. This is all we can ask for when it comes to doing slow food. Blue, I want to thank you for your time. I know we'll probably talk later today, but thank you for your time. I look forward to coming to your restaurant again. I look forward to doing a collaboration in the near future and cooking there again with you. Um, Thank you everybody for joining us. Yeah, thank you so much,
Yes.
everyone. Y'all have a wonderful day.